In this book, she talks about Wall Street versus Main Street, where Main Street is the idealized version of finance in the current system. And Wall Street is the metastasized version of finance that has become cancerous in the system, that's sort of sucking up a lot of the resources. And I did a video book review of this book where I looked at her critiques of Wall Street, and I'll link to that below. But in this video, I really want to take a closer look at Main Street as she sees it. And to some degree, I'm thinking of this as Wall Street versus Main Street versus something different in a different system. But if the task is to design a new system, we need to really understand the best possible version of finance in the current system to figure out how would some of those functions be played in a new system, and what roles would need to be gotten rid of, what functions would need to be hyped up or changed in a different way. So this video is really about Main Street, the idealized version of finance in the current system. Now, because this is a video on finance, it's important to bring forward one of the key analogies that I'm using relating to finance, which is that finance is like a water spigot in a garden, where the financiers get to decide where resources flow, and therefore which parts of the garden get to thrive and get investment, and which parts of the garden might wither away and die. So where I'm going with this is, first I'm going to talk about Main Street, what it looks like in a small town where finance is functioning well, or at least as well as it can in the given system. And then I'm going to look at that and look at the roles and functions that financier, that banker plays. And then I will look at what is wrong with the current system of finance. And in particular, why is this version of finance not a viable long-run thing, even in its best form? And finally, I'll look a little bit at what matters to people when it comes to finance. Let's start by looking at a small town with a single bank, and the banker of that bank meets with lots of different people in the town who have ideas for small businesses. And she essentially decides which of these people with great ideas gets a loan. And her job essentially is to look at the needs of the town and have a heartbeat on people's needs and desires and on the collective spirit of the town. And then to also evaluate each of these potential small business owners. How good is their idea? How well in touch is their idea with the needs of the town? Is this particular person able to implement their idea, or are they not really understanding how business works? And these small business owners, they would like to start their business, but they can't afford all of the equipment and all of the things they would need to buy to get their business going. And of course, all of them are convinced if they have the money to start that, like the resources to hire people and to buy furniture and equipment, if they have that, they are convinced that they'll meet a need in the town and they'll be able to make the money back and they can pay back the loan. That's the basic idea. So we're imagining our small town banker is meeting with a potential restaurant owner who recognizes that this community comes together around food and that the community would be well served by a restaurant that had spaces for large meetings and spaces for hosting graduation parties. Like, this person is aware of the spirit of the community and how valuable a restaurant like that would be. And so she's listening to their idea and evaluating, can this person actually pull this off? Do they have a plan that makes sense? Do they have weaknesses or character flaws that might cause it to be ruinous? She's just evaluating that about them. And then we're also going to have a journalist YouTuber who is good at journalism and is making the case, actually, I can figure out where corruption is happening in our town. And I can make that story interesting on YouTube such that people pay attention to it. But this journalist needs to buy some equipment and some cameras and whatnot, so the banker is evaluating her. And then there's a car mechanic who currently works for somebody else, but he critiques his boss, and he thinks his boss doesn't treat people with respect and is sometimes kind of shady, and he knows that he can actually do a better job as a car mechanic. So he wants to start up his own business. And he's convinced that his own integrity and honesty will attract new customers, will fill a need in the town so that people don't have to wait 2 or 3 weeks to get their car fixed. So he's got a great idea too. And then we've got a guy in the town who wants to make his own movie and become his own producer. And this banker can kind of recognize that that's a vanity project. He's kind of built up in his head how much people will love his vision, but he's kind of egotistical and not really in touch with what people actually want. He just wants attention on himself. And so she's in charge of discerning, is he kind of fooling himself in this vanity project? And then we have these 2 superhero consultants that have a really good idea for the town about how to advise businesses. She can actually see, okay, this kind of consulting firm with this basic idea would really serve needs of businesses in the small town. But the problem is these superhero consulting firm people who are applying for the loan, they're just like really disorganized. They don't really understand how business works. So even though the need they're trying to meet is real, their ability to follow through is not that real. And the banker's job, of course, is to have these conversations to match the needs of the town as they would pay for those needs with the abilities and visions of these potential business owners. That's finance in its idealized form. Now let's look at the different roles our banker plays in the system. And I've already kind of alluded to some of these. For example, the spigot role is the role the banker plays in channeling where resources go. Where resources, of course, include labor and oil and raw materials like wood and basically any resource you could possibly come up with, including some other resources like attention and education and lots of kinds of resources that are scarce in the world. Our financer is going to some degree by default, determine where those resources get channeled. She also has the role of assessing people's amazing ideas and their ability to follow through with those ideas that potentially have societal value and how well matched each idea is to the needs of the economy. And I guess her attunement to the needs of the economy is another thing that our banker is developing expertise in. Like she needs expertise in the kind of discernment that comes in the personal conversation between her and each of these potential business owners. But she also needs to match that conversation with the needs of the world by having a heartbeat on the needs of the world, by having a heartbeat on the way things flow in the world, and basically a heartbeat on the system. That's part of her expertise that she builds up. And in both of these areas, that expertise is not just the numbers in an idealized form of this. It's not just book knowledge. It's also the kind of right brain, intuitive knowledge that can look at the landscape and detect different patterns and learn from her mistakes. Like there's going to be a feedback loop process to this, where she interviews someone, she makes a determination, they go out, they fail, and she kind of thinks about, why did that particular business fail? What did I not see coming? How could I account for that better in the future? So there are these feedback loop processes that go into building up our banker's expertise. Now, one noteworthy thing about our banker's attunement to the economy is that it's attuned to the way people spend money. Now, of course, it's going to be more attuned to people who have more money to spend, and I'll get to that in a second. But because it's attuned based on action, our financier may be really good at thinking about what's the difference between what people say they want or what they claim they want and what they actually do in practice. And there's something like very deeply psychological about that, which might be well aligned to an understanding of the human beast. It might be well aligned to people's real needs and values, even the ones they might not admit on a survey. But also, there might be a misalignment here if the system is causing perhaps addictive behavior, where her attunement to people's behavior is not actually what the people themselves would want someone designing a system to be attuned to. But I guess I'm getting ahead of myself and getting into the critiques. Let's go back and still try to think through this idealized version of finance. And one of the key things here relates to the feedback loops. Because in systems, feedback loops will determine the flow of the system and therefore the way the system evolves. Like these decisions that the financier is making are going to determine what is the infrastructure of the economy in the future. And that's both physical infrastructure, like roads and factories and shopping malls or whatever, but also digital infrastructure and institutional infrastructure. This infrastructure requires some financier to make some decision at some point saying, yes, I believe this has potential to be a good thing for the future, at least as measured by this $1 one vote rather than one person one vote sort of situation. And part of this financier role is weighing risk and return, where it could be there are some ideas that are super risky and are very unlikely to pan out. But our financier recognizes, actually, if this did pan out, it would be transformative for society. It would have like such a big impact and so many people would be attracted to this business idea that it's worth a low probability of success just to give that a try. And those decisions about who gets to try and which risky ideas are good enough for society that we get to try them out, those are so central in determining the shape of the future economy. Because if you invest in enough of these, eventually some of them will actually transform the economy. Now, ultimately, if we're trying to redesign systems in creative ways, we are going to want the attunement of people in these financier-like roles to attune well to the biggest problems of the world. And the problems I think that many people care about deeply. And the current system doesn't really have great mechanisms for attuning major goals like sustainability and justice of various sorts, protection from authoritarianism, fair pathways of upward mobility. Like there are so many issues that many people care about that are not being well attuned to by the financiers or by the people who can actually channel resources in our economy. So eventually we'll want to fix that problem. But for right now, I just want to look at a few of the critiques of the current system of finance, because understanding those critiques will help us to figure out new ways of doing this. And critique number one, of course, is the $1 one vote versus one person one vote phenomenon, where the real question here is not actually how many people will this business idea help. Like that would be ideal if the attunement had to do with what people cared about, essentially weighing people roughly equally, or certainly at least not as unequal as the income distribution. But I don't even think this is exactly like weighing rich people more than poor people. Now, yes, it is weighing rich people more than poor people. Like financiers need to be really attuned to the desires and insecurities and thought processes and things that are valued by rich people. That's certainly true of financiers. And they don't need to pay that much attention to things that are only desired or are needed among lower income people. That's just not going to be as forefront on the minds of the financiers. However, I don't think rich versus poor is exactly the right way of thinking about it. Because if you look at where dollars flow, there are going to be these nodes that have a way outsized impact on where dollars flow, even relative to very rich people. Like if you take a person who's in the top 5% of the income distribution, they may have fancy yachts, they may have a great lifestyle, but compare that person to someone who makes a lot of decisions at corporate headquarters. And if you think about almost like the velocity of money as it circles through those corporate headquarters, there's such a large control over money in terms of that little node in the system at corporate headquarters. I think that it swamps somebody at the top 5% of the income distribution in terms of the need for financiers to attune to those decision makers. Like if you're a good financier in the current system, are you going to spend more time attuning yourself to the needs of the top 5% of income earners? Or are you going to spend more time attuning yourself to how the people in corporate headquarters think and the way their minds go? Because money loops and circles through that corporate headquarters at a phenomenal rate. And I think there's other nodes, like for example, government agencies that make decisions about what companies to contract with from the government. Those are other nodes that are maybe even bigger than any one individual corporation's headquarters. So I think financiers who are making these investment decisions, their attunement from the poor person to the rich person, and then from the rich person to one of these major nodes of financial decision making, I think that's a distribution that kind of looks like this. And that weighing of who financiers are attuned to, that is a huge problem. Now, a couple of other problems with the current system. One is obviously the biases among the bankers or among the financiers. Because they're a class of people with their own social milieu, their own ways of thinking within the industry that are naturally going to have some biases built in. And when we think of mapping those biases onto the decisions about who gets to take a major risk in their business idea or their project idea, that could sort of magnify those biases as sort of money and resources flow through the economy. And if we're trying to imagine some of these potential risky business owners, if one of them has an idea for something that would be so disruptive that it would disrupt the current system where the bankers sit in really nice spots, the bankers may not feel great about that particular business idea, even if that disruption of the economy would actually be transformative, even if it would serve people well. If the banker gets a bad feeling in their gut about it, perhaps because they correctly intuit that this would overturn the existing system in a way that was disadvantageous to their class, then their brains will likely come up with some reason not to finance that thing, even if it does have potential. Now, the last thing I want to talk a little bit about is what people actually care about. Because the finance system should channel resources toward things the population really cares about. And some of that, of course, is solving these big major societal problems. But there's also what are the needs of a human being that are perhaps not well accounted for in the current system. And this topic is bigger than this video. But the reason I wanted to talk about it here is because when we look at these people in our small town who are asking for loans to start their restaurant or their mechanic shop or their journalistic YouTube endeavor, all of those things have value to the people who are creating them, and I think also to the people in their community in ways that are inherent. And this gets at the notion that people care not only about being consumers, but also about being producers. That the agency and the work and the serving of one's community that happens through these small businesses, that's inherently meaningful. And if there's a bias in giving those opportunities to certain types of people who have certain educational backgrounds and certain values, certain cultural traits, that are similar to the financier class, that's going to leave out a lot of communities that may have people in them with just really deeply creative and powerful ideas. And if you kind of magnify that by noting that some of these communities don't have much money passing through them to begin with, it leads to this natural disinvestment in the exact communities where the potential for community and societal thriving could be greatest. And this relates to the feedback mechanism of pure money that doesn't separate oil from labor from other types of scarce resources. So in any case, I think I've laid out enough about this to get us going. I hope this has gotten your brain going in terms of what kinds of features might we want in a system that will serve some of the same functions that finance serves. Like, I do think there will be people whose job it is to keep a heartbeat on the system and the potential for just stuff. And people who have expertise in judging which potential creative projects could work out. That's going to be present in a system of the future. But it would need to fix some of these other problems as they relate to the feedback loops around finance.